Welcome, everyone, to the 30-minute Midas touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh WrestlePlex. Now, here is, pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the 30-minute Midas touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony, and with me, as always, is my co-host, the King of the Mountain, Mark Tipton.
The King of the Mountain. Well, with all apologies to Jeff Jarrett, I don't know that I quite have earned that kind of moniker, but I do appreciate you assigning it to me, and it does take us in the direction of what is going to be today's subject matter. This will probably be an edition of the 30-minute Midas Touch podcast, in which I need the host to be a more even-keeled to try to keep me under control. Today we're going to focus on a particular promotion, and it's a promotion that, from the perspective of a fan, I've had a long-term love-hate relationship with, and that will probably come out during the course of our conversation. But that subject matter is the wrestling promotion known as, well, let's say Total Nonstop Action, now known as Impact Wrestling. Many refer to it simply as TNA.
Yeah. TNA, like we talked about, it's been in business since 2002. It has a long history, and just like you, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it. So I think the first place we need to start is kind of like, how did it all actually come about? I don't know if anyone's ever heard the story or not, but so when Jeff Jarrett was in WWE, apparently there was a situation where it was time for his contract renewal, and him and Jim Ross and whoever had made an agreement about what kind of money he was going to make on when he signed his new deal. Well, a couple months later, they went back on that deal and signed him for less money, right? Okay, so then when Jeff Jarrett's contract renewal came up again, later, it passed without anyone ever knowing it, right? And he was the Intercontinental Champion, so it was one of those big flubs in the office, where, his contract had expired and he was the champion. Now they're in this situation, right? So, and of course, this story's been told several times, and there's all kinds of different numbers. But basically, what happened was they were, they wanted Jeff Jarrett to drop the title to China, and he said he would for X amount of dollars, right? And then he said he eventually went to Jim Ross and said, "Hey, that number I told you that I do, double that, because that's for screwing me on my contract the last time." So we don't know how much it was. Some people say it was $250,000. Some people say it was $400,000. It's one of those things that gets kind of lost in translation over the years. So Jarrett took his $250,000 or however much it was, did the match, left immediately after. I don't think he even stuck around, or just actually walked out of the arena in the clothes that he wore, got it straight into the car and left. And like I said, eventually he hooked up with his dad, and they decided they were going to create an alternative, to the WWE, which, of course, like you said, became Total Nonstop Action.
All right, if you'll pardon my fandom question here, I'm trying to recall now, when he was working with China at that time, was this the Good Housekeeping match?
Yes. That was the final blow. Was a Good Housekeeping match.
Right. That certainly stuck out in my mind, but that's interesting, because here we have an instance. We've mentioned wrestling politics from time to time. Here's where it is. A contract dispute results in a very dramatic change in the history of professional wrestling. I guess what we'll start with is, what were your feelings when you first heard that Jeff and Jerry Jarrett, the way I first heard it, where rumblings is, now this was not that long after the demise of WCW. Yeah. There were many wrestling fans, and I was one of them, terribly heartbroken at the demise of WCW. I'm someone who feels that having multiple national promotions is good for professional wrestling. Having more outlets, more places for wrestlers to perfect their craft, is good for professional wrestling in general, and I'm a fan of professional wrestling, not necessarily any three letters you wish to assemble. And then I heard that Jeff and Jerry Jarrett, two guys, obviously, Tennessee based, someone who people I'm familiar with and have a high opinion of, they're planning on starting promotion. How did you first hear about this coming together?
Well, it was one of those things that there's kind of rumblings in the business because this is 2001, 2002, and this is I've been in the business since 2000, so I kind of started hearing, hey, something's going on in Nashville. You know what I mean? They're talking about this, they're talking about that. So it was kind of one of those rumblings that we kind of heard in the locker room first, and of course once it hit the dirt sheets, as far as they were gonna start their own promotion. It was an exciting time because obviously WCW going under had left a void. You know what I mean? WWE obviously became the biggest game in town, and it was just like I said, there was a void there. Someone needed to have an alternative to them, whatever that may be, and with it being a Jerry Jarrett, Jeff Jarrett kind of collaboration, to me it was going to be Southern style. So that was of interest to me too. It's more of a Southern-based wrestling company, as where WWE is more obviously Northeast. So I was excited, and I think a lot of my peers were excited too. Like, hey, this may be an opportunity for us to get an opportunity.
All right. Well, that's certainly kind of the perspective I had when I first heard about this coming about. And I mentioned the love-hate, and I might even say a roller coaster history in my fandom of TNA / Impact, as it's now known. The next thing I heard that kind of gave me pause was when I heard what they were going to name the promotion. Would you like to talk about the name? Literally, it's known as TNA, and how that came about from your understanding and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, we were just coming off, Jarrett had, obviously created quite a fan base through the Attitude Era. That's really when he kind of hit a really good stride with who Jeff Jarrett was as a performer and a character and whatever. And that's kind of what he carried over to WCW, that same look, and that's the kind of look he had through the remainder of his career, was that King of the Mountain, Jeff Jarrett, WCW chosen one, slap nuts kind of thing, So I think for him, it was just kind of this is let's name it something tongue in cheek. Everybody says they want TNA in wrestling. Well, let's give it to them. Let's give them TNA. Let's give them total nonstop action. You know what I mean? So I'm not a big fan of that. I'm always a fan of a wrestling needs to be in the name. Years ago, we had a company around here called Elite Wrestling Entertainment. Well, originally, they wanted to call it Elite Entertainment. And I chimed in with the fact, hey, will people know we're a wrestling company, or do they think we're a strip club? And everybody goes, good point. And then they end up going with Elite Wrestling Entertainment instead of Elite Entertainment. So yeah, along those same lines, I'm a big fan of, hey, we're wrestling, so let's put wrestling somewhere in the name. So yeah, I wasn't too thrilled with the name, but you're forgetting there was also 3 letters before that TNA in the beginning, and that was the NWA. So it was NWA TNA, right?
Yeah, well, there you go. That was certainly actually next on one of the agenda items I want to discuss, because when they did begin, and let me see if I do recall, I believe the 10 pounds of gold was present at their first pay-per-view, as I recall.
Yeah, they crowned a new champion
that night, and I believe it was in Birmingham, Alabama.
Yeah, maybe.
Was
it Nashville or Birmingham?
I want to say the first one was in Birmingham, and then they moved to Nashville later. I'm sure I will be corrected by the audience if I get that wrong.
Right.
I stand to be corrected. But they did bring in the history and kind of the legacy, we'll say, of the NWA, and made it a part of their brand new promotion. So you have a brand new promotion with a very established brand name, which does make a lot of sense. And I suppose that's where you were going with that.
Yeah, because and the NWA, as much as we don't agree with them in today's day and age, you understand, the NWA, is still very important to the history of my career. It's still important to the history of wrestling in general. And anytime a major promotion wants to become a major promotion, they've used the NWA to do it. You understand? WWE, obviously, originally was a member, or at least Vince Sr. was a board member of the NWA. When they broke away from the NWA, that's when they created their own world title, and Buddy Rogers was the first champion, things like that. WCW obviously came from the Crockett's NWA. So its history was there too. Same thing with ECW. Shane Douglas threw down the NWA World title to create the ECW World Heavyweight title. TNA, no different. They established, hey, we're going to be the 10 pounds gold. The most important world title in the history of our business is now, this is our focal point. That was huge. AEW, same difference. When they wanted to get some exposure, what did they do? Cody Rhodes versus Aldis for the NWA world title. You understand? So everyone's used the NWA to establish their promotions over the years, and this is just another indication of them doing that.
All right. Well, one of the things that really TNA became known for off the bat was what I would consider a bit of an innovation. And I want to see how you feel about this, because when I became aware that they were not going to pursue a cable television package right off the beginning, their intention was, and I have heard this was a idea proposed by Bob Ryder, who had him involved with WCW, and he was someone who was friends to some degree with the Jarretts, and he may have helped come up with this notion. And that was the idea of having a weekly pay-per-view. Traditionally, professional wrestling had a weekly cable presence with a monthly pay-per-view. They decided to kind of sidestep that and go to a plan of a weekly pay-per-view. How did you feel about that?
Well, I don't know if that was necessarily their initial plan. I think maybe it was just by necessity because they couldn't get an actual weekly television gig, a national television gig. So what's our alternative? Well, we can offer this. And basically what they were doing, back then, the pay-per-views were usually about $30 a month, right? So if you bought the monthly package, you got all their events for about $30. So equal out. It was the same as getting WWE's pay-per-view every year, but you were getting all the content of them. But I don't know. I'm still a big fan of, obviously, wrestling on television, and then drawing people into money matches that they'll pay for eventually, whether it be at a live show or a pay-per-view or whatever it may be. So like I said, I don't know if this probably wasn't their first option, but they tried to make the best of it, and it was different. I personally only bought like a few of them, during that time period, but I had friends that bought every one of them, So I would hear about it and kind of hear results and things like that. And this is obviously way before YouTube really and all that kind of stuff, so we couldn't really get a lot of the stuff. So there's a lot of that early TNA stuff that I didn't get to see that I've went back over the years and kind of tried to dig up.
All right. Well, they did go with that for a time period, but there did come a time where they decided they wanted to go in a more traditional format. Now, at that time, they moved to Fox Sports Net. And let me say, up until that point, their weekly pay-per-views, for those of you who remember, had been taking place at the Tennessee State Fairgrounds. And then they were moving to Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida, and began their relationship with Fox Sports Net. This involved the implementation of what was referred to as a more sports-based presentation. Did you have any opinions on the way the Fox Sports Net version of TNA was?
Yeah, it hit its stride really as far as production started to go. Obviously the Universal Studios was a much cleaner look than the Nashville Fairgrounds. Like as historic as that building is, I've wrestled in it a few times myself. And it's a great venue, but at the same time, Universal Studios just had all the bells and whistles for like a live TV taping kind of thing. So and they used to do like the little lower tier thing at the bottom of the screen that showed who was wrestling each other and how much time limit was there and stuff like that. So I like that kind of stuff. But yeah, the product itself, and I think this has kind of been indicative of TNA from the beginning. It's just there's no genuine leadership. You know what I mean? And we look at all the opportunities that they've had. There is no other company that will exist that had more opportunity to dethrone WWE than TNA did. Because if you look at TNA's roster from, let's say, 2007, I'm going to read you these names, and I just want everyone to marvel at the kind of talent that they had available to them in 2007. A1, AJ Styles, Abyss, Alex Shelley, Andy Douglas, Angelina Love, Austin Aries, Austin Creed, who became Xavier Woods, yes. Awesome Kong, BG James, Basham, Doug Basham, Black Rain, who is Goldust, Bob Backlund, Bobby Roode, Booker T, Brother Devon, and Brother Ray, Chase Stevens, Chris Harris, Chris Sabin, Christian Cage, Christopher Daniels, Christy Hemme, Damaja, Dave Pinzer, Dixie Carter, Don West, Dutch Mantell, Elix Skipper, Eric Young, Gail Kim, Glenn Gilberti, Hernandez, Homicide, Jacqueline, James Mitchell, James Storm, Jay Lethal, Jeff Jarrett, Jeremy Borash, Jerry Lynn, Jim Cornette, Jimmy Rave, Johnny Devine, Johnny Stamboli, Judas Messiah, Karen Angle, Kaz, Kevin Nash, Kip James, also known as Billy Gunn, Conan, Kurt Angle, Lance Hoyt, Matt Morgan, Mike Tenay, ODB, Petey Williams, Pierre Caroulet, also known as PCO now, Raven, Rhino, Rick Steiner, Rikishi, Ron Killings, Roxy, Samoa Joe, Scott Demore, Scott Hall, Scott Steiner, Cinchi, who is low-key, Shane Douglas, Shark Boy, Charmel, SoCal Val, Sanjay Dutt, Spike Dudley, Sylvain Grenier, Tyson Tomko, Tracy Brooks, Velvet Sky, and Sting.
Oh, by the way.
Yeah, we also got Sting.
By the way, the man they call Sting, as I'm so fond of calling. Now, on that list, that brings me into a time period after the Fox Sports Net. In my opinion, it never really caught traction. Now, I will admit, I very rarely watch the Fox Sports Net product. The current phrase is people get in their feelings. Well, leaving Nashville to move to Orlando had me in my feelings as a fan. I did get over it, as we all do in life. But after the Fox Sports Net, they moved to Spike TV, and I think that's along the time frame of the talent roster that you're talking about there.
Yeah.
I would say that was probably the golden age. Would that be fair to say? I know in particular now, some of the people we mentioned there's obviously the famous, right off the top of the list, one of the names you mentioned was AJ Styles. Full of mention of my biases, he is one of my favorites, and I really credit him as a TNA guy. Now, I had seen him at some point as part of I want to say NWA Wild Side, I believe.
And he was in WCW at the end, too.
Yes, well...
Very, very.
Yeah, well, my fandom's showing again. That era of WCW, something I try to.
The wipes from remember.
Yeah,
Total Recall.
As best I can.
Right.
But he was someone who I immediately identified as a TNA guy, and along with that tremendous roster of guys who could put together a tremendous product, and in there, they really had a good thing going with Spike TV. Did you feel? At least I felt. Did you feel the same?
Yeah. Like with Spike TV, I really felt they had a huge opportunity to do some things. Because, like I said, they had more opportunity than anyone else had or probably will ever have. Because that roster that I just named, that's ridiculous. Like, listen to all the stud horses and all the guys that were huge stars name-wise in the world of professional wrestling that were in that roster. Kevin Nash, Rick Steiner, Kurt Angle, Sting. I mean, it just goes on and on. And then, like you said, and mix it with the guys that were complete workhorses, like an AJ Styles and a Samoa Joe and like Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley and guys like that. You put all that mix together, and you've got a really, really healthy mix of new and young, and you can start building stars from a lot of that. But that's where they failed to do so. They failed to get over that hump and create that kind of buzz because there was never any concernable direction. As far as a booker goes, your job is to point the ship in a direction and go that way. Well, the ship changed course so much in TNA that it was almost impossible. 1 week they would tell us that, Sting is the future of the company and he's the champion, blah, blah, blah. And then the next week it would be Jeff Hardy. And then after that it'd be Ken Kennedy and then RVD. It was just a revolving door at the top. You know what I mean? When it should be, it's a ladder. You're supposed to go up and come back down and go up and come back down instead of, just like a mobile over a baby's crib. It just goes round and around. So it was the same guys going around and around, but no one could ever find a clear direction of this is what's best for the company. Let's go that way.
All right. I'd like to kind of backtrack and get around the subject that you just brought up because as you went through that roster and we talked about all the things that the company had going forward. One of the real issues has really from its inception. I heard it as from the beginning described as Jeff and Jerry Jarrett. However, very early on, and I did not write down the exact date, but very early on in the process, Panda Energy bought a ownership stake, which of course introduced later. I don't know if she was a prominent role at the beginning, but Dixie Carter became a part of it. Do you want to say anything about?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, okay, so running a wrestling company and running a successful wrestling company are two different things. Okay, people determine success in many different ways. Is the problem? I determine success if the money wise you stay in the black, right? You make money. That would be considered a profitable business. Well, for some reason, the world of professional wrestling, profit for some reason has lost people's lingo. You understand? So like when they say I run a successful wrestling company, they could mean, well, hey, we book WWE stars 12 times a year, and we do this and we do that, and we have 300 people in our building every month, but our payroll is $20,000. So we don't make any money, but you know what? We put on a damn good show. You know what I mean? So like I said, running a wrestling company, running a profitable wrestling company, Jeff Jarrett has said, I believe before, that he just doesn't have the skill set to be the president, the number one guy, the one guy that makes all the decisions in a wrestling company. I'm sure he's a great agent, got a great mind for the business in that sense, but he said that just that particular role is something he can't fill. So in the early days, obviously he was having trouble with him and his dad don't get along anyway, which is, everyone can look that up. They've had a storied history with each other. To this date, I don't know if they've even talked for the last 20 years. I think they had a huge falling out, but so Jerry left early, and like I said, Panda Energy came in because it was going to go under. It was going to go under, and Panda Energy came in and saved it. And I don't know if it ever turned a profit ever. You know what I mean? I remember when AEW was talking about, oh, we're gonna draw 10,000 people. We're gonna be the only non-WWE company to do that in the last 30 years. And I started thinking about that, and I went and did some research, and like TNA, even at its height, like had only drawn like 6,000, 7,000 people to one of their biggest events. And to me, that was kind of mind-boggling. Like, especially when you think about that roster we just named, right? Like, I've seen bookers with a lot less talent, do a lot more with it, right? And here we have, this amazing talent pool, and it just went nowhere, it seemed like. So yeah, that it always comes back to booking, it always comes back to money, and it always comes back to those things. But like, yeah, TNA like had all the opportunity in the world and just felt like it got squandered.
And I probably shouldn't hit on this again, but excuse me, my recollection was even from the very beginning, when the issue of naming the company what they named it, that was a source of dissension between Jeff and Jerry, as I recall, because I certainly at the time thought Jerry Jarrett is going along with this. And apparently he wasn't. But that brings in, but Dixie Carter, you have someone without a wrestling background. And to me, it appeared that this was something that was almost a pet project for her, handed to her by her father, who ran Panda Energy, is my understanding.
Well, I mean, the rumor was that, Dixie Carter and Jeff Jarrett knew each other from the old Nashville days. Like the old 80s days, late 80s, early 90s days, and that's kind of where it came on. Jeff called his old buddy Dixie, who, dad is a billionaire or whatever he may be, and asked for the bailout pretty much, and like they made a deal like that. But yeah, once again, we talked about this before. Like I have no problem with people outside of professional wrestling getting involved in wrestling to a certain aspect, but at the end of the day, you have to have someone of wrestling making decisions. And that was kind of the thing. Like I would hear stories about Dixie Carter being in negotiation meetings with talent, and they were heel talents, right? And her saying things like, well, I just don't see paying you as much as I pay them because the crowd cheers them. You know what I mean? Like that total, like, how many levels can you miss on when you're doing something like that? So yeah, it's like it just, if you want to say money mark, I mean that's a huge thing. Yeah, money mark. Same thing with Tony Khan, huge money mark, the biggest money mark in history at this point. So yeah, like I said, I like an outside perspective, but at the same time, it has to be reined in by someone with expert knowledge in professional wrestling.
All right. Well, thank you for using that term. I was sitting back in my chair with my head in my hands, trying to decide if I wanted to mention that term, because that's really what that screams, that comment. But I'd like to move us forward a little bit. We've seen lots of fits and starts with the management side of TNA, and they made a decision which caused me a great deal of concern at the time, and I was, for good reason, as I found out later on. They decided to bring in, to help kind of revitalize the company at one point, Eric Bischoff and the immortal Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, I mean, as a fan, like I was intrigued by that. Here we are. It's Hogan and Bischoff. Are they going to be able to have equal the same success they had in WCW and give Vince another run for his money? That first night that I watched, it was intriguing. It was new, it was exciting. Yeah, they didn't necessarily have to have X-Pac and Scott Hall and the Nasty Boys and just guys that, let's bring them out from under a rock, put them on television, but like it was new and it was fresh and I understood where they were going. But after about a month of it, it was just kind of same old, same old. You know what I mean? So it's just one of those things you have to, and we've said this before, people think that I'm very, like, I don't like progress in wrestling, and that's not true. It's just, I want it to progress as professional wrestling. I don't want it to progress as something else. There's enough everything else out there. I want professional wrestling. So I want it to progress, but still keep the core values that made professional wrestling great. And I think that was what was always lacking with TNA was, if they did try something, it was so far out of the realm, you know what I mean? Like, it just didn't make any sense, and there was no continuity to the booking at all.
All right. Well, one of the decisions they made that really I disliked from the moment I heard they were going to do this, and I'll let you describe about this, is they decided to go head-to-head with Monday Night Raw. They moved from their, I believe it was a Thursday night time slot. They arranged to move to go head-to-head with the biggest show in the world of professional wrestling at the time and take on Vince, I suppose.
Yeah, that was, I mean, if you look at it now, that's obviously a very ill-timed move. It would probably been better for them to stay on Thursday nights and kind of establish themselves and what they are and what they're doing than if the numbers suggested and if they gained enough steam, yeah, let's go head-to-head with them. Let's make a go for it. But, like, they had no, other than, hey, Hogan and Bischoff are in charge now, what really indications did they have? Now, what TNA did well, and we don't talk about a lot, is, they capitalized on things that WWE wasn't capitalizing on at the time. And, that's like the X Division. The X Division was basically a souped-up cruiserweight division where it was, it wasn't weight limits, it was no limits. And you had guys like Samoa Joe and Christopher Daniels and AJ Styles that started in there and stuff like that. And they were really, all the kind of matches that you're seeing on all these programs nowadays, that was really the birth of that kind of stuff was in the X Division. And then also you have things like, a lot of people like to say the Women's Revolution started in NXT. No, the Women's Revolution started in TNA because they were the ones that really pushed the knockouts. You know what I mean? They were the ones, Awesome Kong and Angelina Love and ODB and, Tracy Brooks and a lot of those, Gail Kim, another great one. I mean, they were the ones that were really giving females time in their matches, letting them wrestle, main evented even some. They were doing that a decade, 15 years before WWE ever thought about doing it. And then, of course, tag teams. Tag teams, you had Beer Money, you had America's Most Wanted, you had the Motor City Machine Guns, you had the Dudley Boys, or as you love to call them, Team 3D. But either way, they had all those elements that, like, if WWE wasn't capitalized on it and wrestling fans want it, then, hey, we are the alternative, and we've got that. But then once Hogan and Bischoff got there, they tried to whitewash that stuff, I guess, and try to get rid of it or at least try to thin it out some. And I just don't think they understood the product they were trying to live in.
Well, I guess one minor but visible aspect of that was TNA had kind of developed a name for itself because they had employed the use of the six-sided ring, which kind of made them stand out, I suppose, was the idea. Now, Hogan and Bischoff returned it to the four-sided ring of tradition. So that kind of lets you know where they were trying to go. I suppose the next thing that happened is we saw where backstage issues created problems constantly. And the next thing I'd like to talk about is there was a time period, in a relatively short time period, where we saw the departure of both Jeff Jarrett and the one that meant a great deal to me personally as a fan was AJ Styles left TNA.
Yeah, first I want to say I hated the six-sided ring. Because of all the things you're going to change in professional wrestling, why change the ring? You understand? Like, that's you could put a ring in a car lot right now, and people will go by and go, "Oh, that's a wrestling ring." You know what I mean? It's so recognizable. There's no reason to ever change it. I understand that they were trying to set themselves apart, like we said, but also from a working standpoint, it's very awkward to deal with because when you hit the rope in the middle on one side, you end up in a buckle on the other side unless you run it diagonally. You understand? So it's always a weird thing. Anyway, so yeah, when I'm sorry, what was the question again?
I was focused on when Jeff. There's a
When
time period where
yeah.
Jeff Jarrett and AJ left.
Yeah, I mean they've had so much backstage drama and tumultuous situations. You know, like the thing with Jeff, was, he was banging Karen Angle, and like Kurt behind Kurt's back or were they separated? I can't remember what it was, but either way, he was messing with the man's either wife or ex-wife. And, he got sent home, because Kurt Angle was obviously the biggest star in the company at that point, and it was like it put everything in jeopardy. That's a huge mistake, as far as business goes and life in general. But, of course, Jeff and Karen ended up married and lived happily ever after, so whatever. But, I mean, from a business standpoint, it was a horrible, horrible thing. And AJ, I think, is just one of those things like he just, he done everything he could do. And, like, they offered him money, but it wasn't enough money. Like, I've established myself as this for you, and you can't pay me what I'm worth, then I have to go find it elsewhere. And that's where he started going to Japan and Mexico and taking the independent bookings and things like that, and eventually ended up in WWE. But yeah, it's always been kind of a roller coaster, with everybody in within the company, and of course, Vince Russo and Jim Cornette and Dutch Mantell and Jeff Jarrett and Don West and Mike Tenay and Dixie Carter and, whoever else may have been writing or booking or whatever at any point, like it always felt very, like schizophrenic. Like no one knew exactly what was going on.
All right, I know our time is almost certainly drawing near, but I do, as a fan, I was thought, well, the person I most, as a watcher of the product, the person I most identified with their brand was AJ Styles. And as I recall, he left, got into a convertible, and literally drove away on one episode of their television. And I felt myself, I thought, well, maybe I'm going too. And since we're drawing, and it's unfortunate we're drawing short because we didn't get to more of the modern day stuff, such as this is the company that helped introduce one of my least favorite subjects, the cinematic match.
Like I said, we're gonna do a whole episode on cinematic matches and my thought process and all that, or lack thereof. But once again, we thank everyone for joining us here on the 30-minute Midas Touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy Greg Anthony, for my co-host, the King of the Mountain, Mark Tipton. Thank you and goodbye.